Atheism doesn't tell you anything at all about how to live your life. Atheism is, I am not convinced there's a God, or I am convinced there's not a God. Neither of those things carry with it any sort of weight on how I should live my life. And for you to come in hang on, I'm still talking, sir. And for you to come in and suggest that I'm not an atheist is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. But you know what? I've heard it from you and your ilk over and over and over again, because the truth is you cannot imagine a world where you're wrong.
What is going on, everyone? So glad you were back on the channel, because this one right here is something special. We have Matt Dillahunty, one of the sharpest skeptical minds in the debate space, going up against Michael Egnor, a neurosurgeon and committed Catholic who believes atheism is not even a real position worth taking seriously. And at some point in this conversation, Michael looks Matt dead in the face and tells him he is not actually an atheist. The reaction that follows is something you genuinely need to see for yourself. Trust me when I say you want to stick around for the full thing, because the way this builds is not something you want to walk away from halfway through. Before we get into it, drop your location in the comments right now. Whether you are watching from a tiny town or a massive city, I always love knowing where this community is spread across the world. All right, let us get into it.
That is not evidence that God wrote a moral code on your heart. I'm sorry, but if you're going to If you're going to construct a logical argument for something, the conclusion should be entailed in the premises. And your conclusion that God wrote something, a moral code on your heart, is not in any of the premises that you just offered, not one.
Okay. So if I sacrifice my life to save someone else, I jump in front of somebody to take a bullet for them, okay, because I want to protect that person. And I think that's the morally right thing to do. I can't think of a more obvious example of living your life and giving your life in service to an objective moral code that does you no good. There is no personal benefit to countless moral acts that people do, but they do it because they think it's right, because it's written on their heart. We all have that feeling, Matt.
So, no, we don't necessarily all have that feeling. I will point out that you just engaged in an argument from personal incredulity fallacy the second you said, I can't think of any other reason to do this. And I can demonstrate that there are justifications for perceived altruism that, as I mentioned during my opening statement, that altruism is something that we can demonstrate. And you're making an appeal to altruism now, but we can also demonstrate fake altruism. That as long as I live in a society that provides benefits to people who willingly put their lives at risk and sacrifice them, then there is a benefit to me to put my life at risk and to potentially sacrifice it. Whether it is a sensation in my head that I will be lauded and applauded by people all around the world, you can take an altruistic action through pure selfishness of, I want to be celebrated. I would like a statue of me that exists long after I'm gone, and therefore I will take. No, wow.
I'm not. Some people do that, of course.
Yes, and so the fact that some people do this means that there is and you just acknowledged it and agreed to it, means that you were wrong when you said you can't think of a reason to do this other than a God giving you this sense of morality. There are other reasons to do it. Now you have to show for any given situation that you view as altruistic, which one is it? Is it real altruism or fake altruism? And how can you tell?
I think that some of it is real. I mean, if you're saying that, sorry?
I do too.
This is the moment where the entire moral argument collapses in real time. And I need you to pay attention to exactly why it collapses. Because it is not just that Michael Egnor got it wrong. It is that he built an argument backwards and then acted like no one would notice. Here is what you have to understand about logical arguments. When you make a claim, any claim, the conclusion you reach has to actually follow from the evidence and reasoning you presented. That is not a complicated rule. That is just the basic standard for any argument to be valid. Matt called this out directly, and he was right to do it. Michael laid out a series of observations about human behavior. People sacrifice themselves. People follow moral codes that cost them something. People act against their own interests, and then landed on the conclusion that God wrote a moral code on everyone's heart. But here is the problem. None of those observations actually lead to that conclusion. You could observe every single one of those behaviors in a world with no God whatsoever, and they would still happen. The conclusion is not in the premises. Full stop. And here is what blows my mind about this exchange. Michael then says that people do moral things because it is written on their heart, and presents that as if it is evidence. But that is just restating the conclusion. That is circular. You cannot prove that God wrote something on your heart by pointing to the fact that you feel something on your heart. That proves nothing about where the feeling came from. Matt then does something really sharp. He identifies the specific fallacy Michael just used, the argument from personal incredulity, which is when you say, I cannot think of any other reason this could be true, therefore my explanation must be correct. And here is the fascinating thing about this fallacy. It is incredibly common in these kinds of conversations, and it sounds convincing because the person saying it genuinely cannot imagine an alternative. But the limit of someone's imagination is not evidence for anything. Throughout history, people could not imagine how lightning worked without a god throwing it. They could not imagine how disease spread without divine punishment. The inability to conceive of a natural explanation has never once turned out to be proof of a supernatural one.
Yeah. So why do people do it? If it's being real.
So the only thing that's required for someone to take an altruistic step is for them to be convinced that it's the right thing to do. And you can be convinced that something's the right thing to do, irrespective of whether it is or whether it's objectively true. You can get somebody to commit atrocities once you can get them to believe absurdities. And as long as the only thing that's required for someone to act in a way that is consistent with a particular religious doctrine is for them to be convinced that the doctrine is real. It does not require that the doctrine is in fact real. And so you have to come up with a way to show the difference between someone who's acting in accordance with a doctrine they believe to be real versus someone who's acting in accordance with a doctrine that is real. I don't know how to do that.
Right. But you've agreed with me that there are people who act out of respect for an objective moral law.
No, I've agreed with you that there are people who
that's
act,
not in personal interest.
I agree with you. There are people who act that way because of their belief, and whether or not it's whether they believe it's objective or not is irrelevant.
Right.
They can believe it's subjective and still do it.
So you don't believe that it's objectively wrong, for example, to kill innocent people or rape babies.
Hang on. We just went through a whole bunch of stuff. And when you got to a point where it was exposed that you were wrong about what you said, you went back to, I don't think it's objectively wrong to rape people and kill babies. That's not what we were just discussing. We were discussing altruism and whether or not there's a justification for it.
But what we're discussing now, Matt, my question is it objectively wrong to do certain things?
I've already answered this.
Outside of opinions.
I've already answered this, and I'm sorry that you don't understand it. I will try one more time.
Yeah, try it again.
When you declare what a foundation of morality is, once that's done, you can compare the consequences of various actions with respect to that foundation, with respect to that goal. And that comparison can be objective in the same way that while the rules of chess are ultimately arbitrary, they didn't have to be that way, we made up the game, it is objectively against the rules for you to move your pawn forward 4 spaces at the beginning of the game. Now, you can say, is it objectively wrong? Well, no, we could have house rules, but we're talking about these rules. So before you can make any sort of claim about whether or not something is objectively wrong, you have to have a set of rules that you're going to use to compare it to. In your case, you have what you think God wrote on your heart. In my case, go ahead.
Right. What you're talking about is epistemology, and I'm talking about ontology. That is, you're saying, how can we know what the objective rules are? It's a very fair question. It's an important question. It's a question that ethicists and theologians have asked for thousands of years. My question has nothing to do with that. My question is, do moral laws exist objectively.
No.
Ontologically.
I've already answered that 2 or 3 times. Moral laws do not exist as things unto themselves anywhere. There's been no demonstration of that. I don't even know what it would mean to say out here somewhere is an objective moral law.
You have to understand what is actually being exposed in this section, because it is subtle and it is important. Michael keeps trying to get Matt to admit that certain things are objectively wrong in a way that requires God as the foundation. And Matt keeps pointing out something that Michael simply refuses to engage with, which is that whether someone believes their moral code is objective or not is completely irrelevant to whether they will follow it. People follow moral codes they are convinced are right. That is all that is required. You do not need an external divine authority for that to happen. You just need to be convinced. And here is what makes this so interesting from a philosophical standpoint. Matt draws a comparison that is genuinely clarifying. Think about the rules of chess. The rules of chess are completely arbitrary. Nobody handed them down from on high. We made them up. But once you agree to play chess, it is objectively against the rules to move your pawn forward 4 spaces. The objectivity exists within the framework. It does not require the framework to have come from God. It requires the framework to be agreed upon. That is all. And once you understand that, you realize that the question of whether God exists becomes completely separate from the question of whether we can make objective moral assessments within an agreed framework. Michael's response to all of this is to keep asking whether moral laws exist objectively, as if repeating the question will eventually produce a different answer. And here's the thing about that pattern. When someone has given you a detailed and reasoned answer, and you respond by simply restating your original question, that is not a rebuttal. That is an admission that you do not have one. Matt answered the question multiple times with precision, and the response was just the question again.
Because it doesn't have any, so you could even say, here's what God...
I do know what it means. What it means to say that is that I don't believe that innocent people should be killed. I don't believe
that's not what it means.
Should be raped.
No, that's not what any of that means.
I don't believe that Jews should be gassed.
That's not what any of that means. That's not what any of that means. The fact that there isn't, the fact that you're convinced there's an objective moral code doesn't tell you what it is. The objective moral code could be the exact opposite of what you believe. This is the thing that you've done a couple of different times, which is when you were running through your opening, talking about, oh, we all know this, and then you had a bunch of questions, and then these questions have been answered. These are the reasons why you're a believer. Well, the fact that it seems to me that you are very much, I want there to be a moral code. I want there to be an explanation for the origin of the universe. I want there to be this, and atheism doesn't offer that, so I'll go with Catholicism. And that is also fallacious. It doesn't mean that the answer there is correct.
So, I've often said that I would be more accepting of atheism as a belief if atheists actually believed it also. But atheists. So are you
saying I'm not an atheist? I am not.
Yeah, I'm saying you're not an atheist.
Okay.
Because you don't live your life that way.
Bullshit. Atheism doesn't tell you anything at all about how to live your life. Atheism is, I am not convinced there's a God, or I am convinced there's not a God. Neither of those things carry with it any sort of weight on how I should live my life. And for you to come in, hang on, I'm still talking, sir. And for you to come in and suggest that I'm not an atheist is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. But you know what? I've heard it from you and your ilk over and over and over again, because the truth is you cannot imagine a world where you're wrong.
Atheists believe in a number of things that are every bit as well defined as things that religious people believe in. They believe that there is no God. They believe that nothing caused everything for no reason.
That's not true.
They believe there's no ultimate purpose for anything. They believe there's
that's
no
not true.
These are basic atheist viewpoints.
No, they're not. See, that's the thing.
So you do believe there's a purpose?
No, I don't believe there's an externally imposed intrinsic purpose in the universe. But what I believe
that's what I said.
No, no, sir, it's not what you said. And I'm sorry that mere simple logical clarity is difficult for you. But what I believe isn't necessarily what all atheists believe.
Right.
You tried to create a bucket and exclude me from it. And the only criteria for that bucket in your no true atheist fallacy is whether or not one believes there's a God. I happen to not believe that there's an intrinsic purpose bestowed upon life from external, but not every atheist agrees with that. Not every atheist agrees with a great many things. So when you start making a list of what atheists believe, as soon as you get past they don't believe in a God, you're wrong.
This is the moment I have been waiting for, and it is even better than I expected. Matt does something in this section that cuts straight through everything Michael has been building toward the entire debate. He looks at the pattern of Michael's questions. Why is there a moral code? Why is there an explanation for the universe? Why is there meaning? And he points out what is actually driving all of them. Matt says directly that it seems like Michael very much wants there to be a moral code, wants there to be an explanation for the universe, wants there to be meaning. And because atheism does not offer those things in the way religion does, he chose Catholicism. And then Matt lands the critical point that wanting something to be true is also fallacious. It does not make it true. That observation matters enormously. Because it reframes the entire debate, it is not just that the arguments for God's existence are weak, it is that the emotional need driving those arguments is doing a lot of work that the logic is supposed to be doing. And when you separate those two things, the arguments become much harder to defend. And then Michael says Matt is not a real atheist because he acts morally. Let that land for a second. After an entire debate about whether God exists, the closing move is to suggest that the person arguing against God's existence cannot possibly really be an atheist because he seems like a decent person. That is the no true Scotsman fallacy applied to an entire worldview. It is the logical equivalent of saying you cannot really be a chess player if you also enjoy checkers. Atheism is one position on one question. Whether a God exists, it carries no doctrine about how to live, what to value, or how to treat people. Matt has been saying this for years across hundreds of conversations, and he said it here with exactly the right level of controlled fury. Because the truth is, you cannot imagine a world where you are wrong, and that is not a debate tactic. That is a diagnosis. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.